Why did the room fall silent the moment she stepped inside? It wasn't dramatic, no music stopped, no glass shattered. And yet something shifted, subtle, instinctive, the way animals sense pressure changes before a storm. She stood in the doorway of Murphy's bar for half a second longer than necessary, letting her eyes adjust. Not to the light, to the people, 53 bodies. Too many to count individually, but not too many to assess. Her gaze moved the way it always had. Door, corners, hands, feet, exit paths. She didn't think about it. She never had. Thinking slowed reaction. This was muscle memory, burned in deeper than language. The uniform did most of the talking before she ever did. Old navy blue, faded at the seams, perfectly pressed in the places that mattered, worn thin where years of movement had rubbed fabric against bone. The ribbons sat straight, precise, quietly defiant. It was the kind of uniform that had been lived in, not displayed. The kind people didn't notice unless they knew what they were looking at. She moved forward, favoring her right leg just enough to be real, enough to tell the truth without explaining it. Her name, Sarah Reeves, stayed buried where it always did. Names were liabilities, faces too. Tonight she was just another woman in a bar near a base, middle-aged, unremarkable, easy to dismiss. She chose a stool at the end of the bar, back to the wall, sightline to the door, habit not paranoia. The bartender caught her eye. Sam, same as always, Vietnam vet, knew silence the way other men knew jokes. He nodded once. She nodded back. 2 fingers, bourbon, eagle rare. The glass arrived without ceremony. She wrapped her hand around it, feeling the weight, the cool. The tremor she used to fight didn't come anymore. That had taken years. Yo, check this out. The voice cut through the room like a thrown bottle. Loud, confident, young. She didn't turn. Jake Morrison didn't need her to. He was already standing, already full of himself in the way only recently anointed warriors could be. Fresh trident ink, muscles that still believed strength was the same thing as power. Looks like we got stolen valor walking in here. The word hung there, stolen, heavy with accusation and entitlement. She took a sip. Inside her chest something tightened, not fear, not anger, recognition. She had seen this before, in villages, in briefing rooms, in men who thought identity was something you wore instead of something you carried. She learned long ago that correcting them too early ruined the lesson. Rodriguez stood next, younger, sharper edges, desperate to be seen. What makes you think you can wear that uniform? Still, she didn't answer. Silence was a tool. Most people forgot that. Peterson came closer, already quoting statutes like scripture. Chen lifted his phone, hungry for spectacle. Thompson blocked the door, not aggressively but deliberately. The dangerous ones never rushed. 5 men, 1 woman, 53 witnesses. And somewhere in the corner she felt it, the weight of a gaze that knew better, a Master Chief's stare, the kind that didn't interrupt because it didn't need to. Her hands folded the napkin without thought. Square, clean creases, 4 folds, the way she'd been taught when discipline was still a matter of survival, not tradition. Someone laughed. She noticed the calluses being noticed. Good. Jake stepped in close, too close, alcohol and ego narrowing his world to a single point, her. Take it off, he said. Right here, apologize. There it was. The line. She lifted her eyes then, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to meet his. You're about to make a mistake, she said quietly. He laughed. Mistakes were always funny until they were. When she slid off the stool, the room leaned forward with her. When she dropped to the floor, it leaned harder, 1 arm behind her back, down, up, clean, controlled. Each movement a truth she'd paid for in blood and breath. She counted internally, not because she needed to, because she always did. At 25 she stood. The silence afterward was different, heavier, confused. She leaned close to Rodriguez as she passed, whispered 6 words. His face told the rest of the story. When the questions came, phases, signals, protocols, she answered them the way she'd always answered under pressure. Calm, exact, unadorned. Facts didn't need emotion to be devastating. Jake grabbed her collar. That was when the room crossed a line it couldn't uncross. She didn't fight him. She looked up and spoke gently. "I'll put you on the ground in 3.7 seconds. He didn't believe her. They never did. But somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the scars and the memories and the ghosts that never slept, something old and steady woke up. Not violence. Resolve. And she wondered, not for the first time, how many lessons had to be taught the hard way before dignity learned how to walk into a room and be recognized without asking. Sometimes, she thought, invisibility wasn't a curse. Sometimes it was the test. And they were about to fail it. Why did her pulse slow just as everyone else's sped up? Jake's hand was still twisted in her collar, close enough now that she could smell the sour edge of beer on his breath, close enough that he mistook proximity for dominance. The room held its breath, waiting for noise, a shout, a blow, something explosive enough to justify the tension. She gave them none of that. Instead, she exhaled. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it changed everything. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Her weight shifted forward, barely noticeable unless you'd spent years watching bodies before they moved. Her gaze softened, not in surrender, but in focus. The kind surgeons had, the kind snipers had, the kind commanders learned when panic became useless. "You should let go," she said, not to threaten him, but to offer him one last exit. Jake laughed again. That laugh carried relief, the kind people feel when they believe they've won. "You hear this," he said to the room. "She thinks she's scary." She looked past him just for a second. At Thompson. He noticed. He noticed the way her eyes flicked to his left knee, the micro pause in her assessment. His weight instinctively shifted, betraying the injury he'd never talked about. That was the moment doubt crept in. Doubt didn't roar, it whispered. Her voice stayed calm, almost tired. "I don't need to be scary," she said. "I just need to be right." Then she spoke again, and this time it wasn't for Jake. 3.7 seconds. The number hung there, absurd and precise. Rodriguez laughed too loudly. "Grandma's got a stopwatch now." She didn't correct him. She never corrected people who were already teaching themselves. Jake tightened his grip, his pride screaming louder than his instincts. That's when she moved. Not fast, efficient. Her left hand came up and pinned his wrist. Not with strength, but with placement. The joint lock followed like punctuation. His elbow bent in a direction elbows weren't meant to go, and his laugh turned into a sharp inhale of pain he couldn't hide. "One." She pivoted on her bad leg, compensating without thought, her hip brushing his center of gravity. He stumbled, surprised more than hurt. "Two." She swept his leg, not hard, not flashy, just enough. Gravity finished the argument. He hit the floor with a sound that felt louder than it was. 3. Her knee stopped an inch from his throat. Not touching, never touching, pressure without contact, control without injury. 3.7 seconds. She stood. The silence after wasn't cinematic, it was ugly, awkward, real. Jake lay on the floor, gasping, his ego bruised far worse than his body. Thompson had frozen mid-step. Chen's phone dangled uselessly from his hand. Peterson's mind was racing through probabilities, each one screaming that something had gone catastrophically wrong. She stepped back, giving Jake space to breathe, to live, to learn. "I told you," she said quietly, "a tactical assessment is not a threat." She returned to her stool and sat down, adjusted her uniform, smoothed the fabric like nothing had happened. Inside her chest, something old and heavy stirred. She hadn't wanted to do that. She hated demonstrations, hated how people remembered the spectacle instead of the warning, hated how violence, even restrained, always became the headline. But sometimes restraint required proof. The Master Chief stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor cut through the murmurs like a blade. He didn't shout, didn't posture. He walked toward her with the careful respect of a man approaching a superior he wasn't certain he outranked. "Ma'am," he said quietly. She met his eyes. For the first time since she'd entered the bar, she nodded first. "Master Chief." That single word landed harder than the takedown. Peterson swallowed. "That rank is not the point," she interrupted gently. Her gaze swept the five of them, not with anger, not even disappointment. "With weight." "Sit," she said. They hesitated. "Now." They sat. She took a sip of bourbon, let the silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. Silence was where reflection happened if you let it. "You accused me of disrespect," she said. "Tell me what respect means." No one answered. Jake shifted on the floor, then forced himself upright, eyes down. "Respect is earning the uniform." She nodded slowly. "And how do you earn it?" "Training, sacrifice, brotherhood." "And humility?" she asked. The word landed awkwardly among them. Rodriguez spoke, voice tight. "Yes, ma'am." "Then why," she asked softly, "did 5 men who claim humility decide a woman drinking alone wasn't worthy of it?" No one had an answer that didn't sound like an excuse. Peterson tried anyway. "We thought." She raised a hand. "Thought is where mistakes begin," she said. "Intelligence begins when you question what you think." She leaned back slightly, the old injuries in her hip reminding her they still existed. Pain was a language she'd learned to speak fluently. "You want proof?" she asked. "You want credentials?" She reached into her pocket and placed something on the bar. "Not an ID. A coin." It was heavy, darkened by age. The trident etched on one side but distorted, ghosted. The reverse side held a symbol none of them recognized, but every one of them felt. The Master Chief inhaled sharply. "Ghost 7, he whispered. Jake looked up, confused. "What the hell is Ghost 7? The woman didn't answer him. The Master Chief did. "Ghost 7 isn't a unit," he said. "It's a name that doesn't exist on paper." Her eyes flicked to him, a silent acknowledgement. Peterson's voice trembled. "Then how?" "How am I here?" she finished. "Because someone has to watch the cracks." She stood again, slower this time. Age and injury making themselves known, not weakness cost. "For 6 months," she said, "I've gone where people stop pretending. Bars, locker rooms, off-base apartments. I listened. I watched. I learned who wore the uniform like armor and who wore it like responsibility." Her eyes returned to Jake. Tonight was supposed to be quiet. The door opened then. 3 men entered, moving with the unmistakable presence of authority that didn't need to announce itself. The bar fell silent. Admiral Stone stopped a few steps inside, eyes locking onto her. "Admiral Reeves," he said. The title hit like a shockwave. Jake went pale. She sighed a small human sound. "I was almost finished my drink." Stone didn't smile. "We need you now." She turned back to the 5 men. "Mr. Morrison," she said evenly, "you ordered me to remove my uniform." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Technically," she continued, "you ordered a flag officer to strip in public. That's problematic." His knees looked like they might give out. "But that's not the lesson," she said. "The lesson is this." She looked at all of them. The most dangerous person in the room is rarely the loudest. Dignity doesn't announce itself. It waits. She stepped past them toward the door. As she reached it, she paused. "Master Chief," she said, "they're yours 3 weeks." He snapped to attention. "Yes, ma'am." She glanced back once more. Learn, she said, or leave. The door closed behind her. And for the first time since they'd earned their tridents, 5 men realized the uniform didn't make them powerful. It had just exposed how much they still had to become. Sometimes strength doesn't shout. It walks away and leaves you standing in the quiet, forced to hear yourself think. Why did the hallway feel longer now that no one was watching her? The bar door closed behind her with a soft, unceremonious click. No applause, no gasps, just the hum of the bass corridor and the distant echo of boots somewhere far away. Admiral Sarah Reeves walked down the hall with measured steps, her posture still precise, but something inside her loosened the moment the noise faded. Her hand trembled. Not enough for anyone else to notice, enough for her to notice. She flexed her fingers once, then again, grounding herself in sensation. The faint ache in her hip pulsed like a metronome, steady and honest. Pain had always been easier to trust than praise. Admiral Stone walked beside her, silent. He'd learned long ago that words too early only cluttered the moment. 2 security officers followed at a respectful distance, not guarding her, escorting the weight of what she carried. 3 weeks, Stone asked finally. She exhaled through her nose. They'll either understand what the uniform asks of them or they won't. That part isn't on me. Stone nodded. You embarrass them. She stopped walking. Stone stopped too. She turned to face him slowly, carefully, as if sudden motion might fracture something already stressed. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. I didn't embarrass them, she said. I let them meet themselves. Stone studied her face. You always did have a way of making people uncomfortable. Truth does that. They resumed walking. The operation's wing smelled like cold metal and recycled air, a scent she associated with nights that never really ended. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest as they passed the briefing room doors. Ghosts lived in places like this, not the cinematic kind, the quiet ones, the ones that waited until the lights dimmed. Stone opened the door. Inside, a handful of analysts stood around a projection table. Maps hovered in soft blue light, layered with symbols that meant everything and nothing until lives got attached to them. She took her seat. Status, she said. A young lieutenant cleared his throat. Ma'am, we've confirmed anomalous signal traffic originating from the Alboran Sea region. Frequency modulation matches historical Ghost 7 signatures. The name settled in her chest like an old wound being pressed. Ghost 7. Not a unit, not an organization. A contingency. Born in the margins of classified doctrine, Ghost 7 existed for missions that couldn't exist, failures that had to be absorbed by silence, operations where success meant erasure, and survival meant pretending you never lived the life that almost killed you. She'd been 32 when she took the oath, younger than she should have been, older than she felt. What's the objective? She asked. Stone didn't answer. He nodded to the screen instead. The image shifted. A satellite capture of a cargo vessel, rust-streaked and deliberately unremarkable. Its manifest read humanitarian aid. Its tracking beacon had been spoofed so cleanly it almost impressed her. Almost. What's aboard? She asked. We don't know, the lieutenant said. That's the problem. She leaned back, fingers steepled. You don't wake Ghost 7 for a mystery. You wake it for a certainty you don't want to name. Stone met her eyes. We have reason to believe the vessel is carrying a prototype targeting algorithm, autonomous, self-learning. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. That research was buried, she said, by my recommendation. Stone nodded. Someone dug it up. Silence settled. She closed her eyes briefly. Images flickered, a desert airfield at dawn, a drone feed going dark, a voice on comms cutting mid-sentence. She opened her eyes again before memory could finish its sentence. How many people know? She asked. Too many, Stone said, and not enough. She exhaled slowly. Where do I fit in? Stone hesitated. She noticed. Say it, she said. You don't, he admitted, not officially. That earned him a small, humorless smile. Then why am I here? Stone's voice softened. Because the algorithm was trained on your missions. The room felt suddenly smaller. Her pulse thudded once, twice. They used my data, she asked. Yes. Without consent. Without context. Without the parts that explained why certain decisions were made, or what they cost. She stood. No, she said, shut it down. We can't, Stone replied. It's already operational. Her hand curled into a fist at her side. So you turned judgment into code, she said quietly, and now you're surprised it's being sold. Stone didn't argue. She paced once, then stopped. Who's the handler? Unknown. Who's protecting it? Everyone who thinks distance makes them safe. She nodded slowly. Then this doesn't need firepower. Stone raised an eyebrow. It needs memory, she said. It needs someone who understands what can't be quantified. She looked around the room. Get me a platform, she said. High altitude, long endurance, no weapons package. The lieutenant blinked. Ma'am. If this thing learns from patterns, she continued, then it needs to see what it can't predict. Stone's eyes sharpened. You're talking about insertion. I'm talking about presence. A beat. Stone sighed. You're not cleared for field ops. She met his gaze evenly. Clearances are for rules, she said. This is about responsibility. Stone rubbed his temple. You're asking me to put an admiral in the air. She tilted her head. You're asking me to fix your mistake. Silence. Finally, Stone nodded. You'll have 20 minutes over target, no more. She exhaled, something between relief and resignation. Prepare the aircraft, she said, and Stone. Yes. If this goes wrong, she said softly, erase my name first. Stone studied her, then nodded once. As the room emptied, she remained seated, staring at the projection. She thought of the bar, of Jake's face when power shifted, of how easily authority could be mistaken for worth. She thought of the algorithm learning without conscience. And she wondered, not for the first time, how many times she'd tried to outrun the consequences of doing what she thought was right. Outside, engines began to spin up. Inside, she closed her eyes and whispered a promise she'd made long ago, to no one who could hold her to it. I'll finish this. Sometimes, redemption doesn't come as forgiveness. Sometimes, it comes as one last responsibility you don't get to refuse. Why did the cockpit feel smaller than she remembered? The canopy sealed with a dull hiss, shutting out the hangar and sealing her inside a world of dials, soft glows, and familiar restraint. Admiral Sarah Reeves rested her head back for a second longer than procedure allowed, letting the aircraft's low vibration settle into her bones. She hadn't flown in years. Not officially. The platform beneath her wasn't built for combat. No missiles, no flares, just altitude, endurance, and silence. A ghost of an aircraft for a mission that didn't want to be seen. The kind she trusted more than anything loud or proud. Control, this is Echo 1, she said, her voice steady despite the pressure tightening her chest. Systems green. Copy Echo 1, came the reply. You're cleared for ascent. As the aircraft lifted, something in her chest loosened, then tightened again. Flying had always been the one place where her thoughts lined up. No rank, no expectations, just physics and choice. Up here, mistakes didn't argue, they simply ended you. Clouds slid beneath her, soft and indifferent. The horizon curved gently, a reminder of how small everything looked from distance. She climbed. At 60,000 feet, the world felt far away. Borders disappeared. Politics dissolved. Only trajectories remained. Echo 1, you are approaching the window. She acknowledged and reduced speed. The aircraft settled into a holding pattern that felt like hovering over a memory she'd tried not to revisit. Below her, the cargo vessel cut through dark water, its wake a pale scar on the sea. Unremarkable, forgettable, perfect. Begin passive scan, she said. Data streamed in, signal bursts, encrypted chatter, machine logic learning as it went. She watched and listened. The algorithm's behavior was subtle, too subtle for anyone looking for aggression. It didn't hunt targets, it evaluated uncertainty, human hesitation, command lag, emotional delay. It was learning when humans paused. Her jaw tightened. They had trained it on her. On the moments she'd waited. On the decisions she'd agonized over because lives had names, not numbers. Damn it, she whispered. A memory surfaced uninvited. A night desert landing, a pilot's voice cracking over comms, a choice she'd made that saved 12 and lost 1. The report had called it optimal. She'd called it a failure she'd never stopped paying for. The algorithm didn't feel guilt. That was the problem. Echo 1, Control said, hesitant. We're seeing anomalous behavior. The signal is adapting to your presence. Of course it is, she murmured. She banked slightly, adjusting altitude. The machine responded, recalibrating its scan pattern. It was curious. Like a child. Or a predator. She opened a secure channel. Go 7, she said quietly. The phrase wasn't a command, it was a confession. The system reacted immediately. Signal amplitude spiked. The algorithm recognized the imprint, her voice, her cadence, the pauses between her words. It was listening. Her heart pounded harder now. Not fear, responsibility. You learned from my choices, she said, but you don't understand them. The algorithm responded with a predictive model, overlaying probable outcomes based on her historical decisions. Clean, efficient, cold. She swallowed. You don't know why I hesitated, she said. You only know that I did. She shut off autopilot. Control's voice jumped. Echo 1, advise. I'm fine, she said. Give me silence. She flew manually. Subtle adjustments only she would think to make. Micro-corrections that had never made it into any report because they'd seemed insignificant at the time. The algorithm struggled. Its predictions diverged. Error margins widened. She felt a strange ache in her chest, something like grief. You can't calculate regret, she said softly. You can't measure the cost of being right. The vessel below altered course. Echo 1, the ship is changing heading. I know, she said. The algorithm was reacting defensively now, attempting to preserve itself by retreating into unpredictability, a behavior it had learned from humans trying to hide mistakes. Irony tasted bitter. She leaned forward, hands steady on the controls despite the sweat gathering at her temples. I made those decisions because people trusted me, she said, not because they were efficient. The system spiked again. Her screens flickered. Echo 1, we're losing telemetry. Just keep the channel open, she said. She descended slightly, breaking a rule she'd helped write years ago. Altitude wasn't always safety. Sometimes distance blinded you. The sea grew clearer beneath her. The ship's deck lights glowed faintly. She imagined the people aboard, operators who didn't know what they were carrying, or who knew and had already made their peace with it. Listen to me, she said, voice firm now. You're not a weapon, you're a reflection. The algorithm's learning loop began to collapse. Contradictions stacked. Outcomes failed to converge. She felt it then, a sharp pain in her hip, radiating upward. Her breath caught. Echo 1, pull up, Control shouted. She ignored them. She learned long ago that sometimes you had to get close enough to be hurt. Her voice softened. I lived with every consequence, she said. That's what made the choices matter. The system's signal wavered. For a moment, just a moment, the algorithm stopped optimizing. It paused. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the signal had gone dark. Silence flooded the cockpit. Control, she said quietly. The package is inert. A long pause. Confirmed, Control replied. Signal loss complete. She leaned back, chest heaving. Her hands shook now, no reason to hide it. Below her, the vessel continued on its course, unaware that the most dangerous thing it carried had just learned how to stop. She guided the aircraft upward, back towards safe altitude. Inside her, something loosened, not triumph, not relief. Acceptance. She had confronted the part of herself she tried to turn into doctrine. As she leveled out, she whispered almost to herself, some things shouldn't be automated. The engines hummed steadily. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she'd chosen something for the right reason, even if no one would ever know. Sometimes courage isn't about action. Sometimes it's about standing close enough to your past to tell it no. Why did the quiet feel heavier than the danger ever had? The engine settled into a steady hum as Echo 1 climbed back toward its cruising altitude. No alarms, no voices rushing in her ears, just the long, unbroken silence that followed a choice you couldn't undo. Admiral Sarah Reeves loosened her grip on the controls only after she realized her fingers were aching. She flexed them slowly, feeling the blood return, the tremor she'd suppressed now free to surface. The pain in her hip burned brighter, a reminder that her body kept its own ledger. Echo 1, Control said carefully, as if afraid to disturb her. We have you stable. Begin return when ready. She didn't answer right away. Below her, the sea was already swallowing the moment. No evidence, no wreckage, no victory anyone could point to. Just dark water and a ship that would reach port carrying nothing more than ordinary cargo and ordinary men. She swallowed. Copy, she said at last. RTB. As the aircraft turned, her mind didn't follow. It stayed behind, circling the pause the algorithm had made. That fraction of a second where optimization had failed, where the machine had encountered something it couldn't resolve. Responsibility. She built her life around that word, even when she pretended she hadn't. Every rank she'd worn, every silence she'd accepted, every relationship she'd let erode in the name of duty. Responsibility wasn't heroic. It was lonely. It asked for everything and thanked you with scars. Her thoughts drifted, uninvited, to the bar. Jake's stunned face, Rodriguez's shame, the way power had drained out of the room the moment truth stepped in. She told them dignity doesn't announce itself. But she hadn't told them what it costs. The landing came smoothly, almost gently. Tires met runway. Brakes whispered. The aircraft rolled to a stop like it had all the time in the world. When the canopy opened, cold night air rushed in, sharp and real. She climbed down slowly, favoring her leg now that no one was watching. A ground crew stood nearby, eyes forward, professional enough not to stare. Stone waited at the edge of the tarmac. You did it, he said. She shook her head. I stopped something that's different. Stone studied her. The system's dead permanently. Good. That research trail, he continued, it leads back to contractors, former officers, people who thought distance meant immunity. She looked past him toward the dark horizon. It always does. Stone hesitated. There will be questions. There always are. He softened his voice. And answers. She met his gaze, only the ones that matter. They walked in silence toward the operations building. Each step sent a dull echo through her hip, up her spine. She welcomed it. Pain kept her present. Inside, the building buzzed with controlled urgency. Analysts spoke in low voices. Screens flickered with after-action data. She passed through it all like a ghost, visible, respected, untouched. Until she was. A young petty officer stood near the corridor, clearly waiting, nervous, unsure whether to speak. She stopped. "Yes," she asked. The officer straightened. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." She nodded. "I was in the bar earlier," he said. When everything happened." She held his eyes, giving him space. "I just wanted to say I didn't know," he admitted. "I thought strength looked a certain way." She waited. He swallowed. "I see now that it doesn't." Something in her chest tightened, not pride, not relief. "Hope." "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly, "and for listening." He nodded, visibly steadied by the exchange. As she walked away, she felt the weight shift. Not lift, shift. Like a burden finally being carried evenly instead of dragging behind her. Later, alone in her quarters, she sat on the edge of the bed and unfastened her uniform piece by piece. Each motion was deliberate. Ritual mattered. When the jacket finally came off, she held it for a moment longer than usual. The fabric was warm. She thought of all the times she'd worn it to hide grief, to command rooms, to become smaller when being seen felt dangerous. She laid it carefully across the chair. In the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Gray at the temples, lines carved by years of restraint, eyes that had seen too much and still chosen to look again. She pressed a hand to her hip and winced. Tomorrow, doctors would ask questions she'd half answer. Reports would be written with clean language and empty margins. Somewhere, a committee would debate ethics without ever feeling the weight of a decision in their bones. And tomorrow night, 5 men would begin 3 weeks they hadn't expected, learning that power without humility hollowed itself out. She lay back slowly, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, sleep didn't feel like surrender. As the base settled into night, she allowed herself one quiet thought, not of pride, not of regret, but of resolve. The world would keep building things that moved faster than conscience. Someone would always need to stand in the way. Sometimes, redemption isn't loud or visible. Sometimes it's choosing to remain human, when it would be easier not to. Why did she wake before the alarm, already knowing this was the last quiet she would get? The room was dark, untouched by dawn, but Admiral Sarah Reeves was wide awake. Not startled, not restless, just awake in the way people are when something inside them has finally settled into place. She lay still, listening. The base breathed around her, ventilation murmurs, a distant door closing, boots somewhere far off, measured and unhurried, life continuing without urgency, without her needing to intervene. That was new. For most of her life, silence had meant danger. Quiet meant something had gone wrong. Quiet meant she'd missed something, but this silence felt different, earned, honest. She swung her legs over the side of the bed slowly, bracing for the familiar flare in her hip. It came, sharp but manageable. Pain had become a companion she respected. It reminded her she'd stayed long enough to pay the bill. She stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the sky was just beginning to change, the black thinning into deep blue. No ceremony, no announcement, just light doing what it always did, whether anyone noticed or not. She watched it for a moment, longer than necessary. By mid-morning, the questions arrived exactly as predicted. They came in clean uniforms and careful language, in conference rooms that smelled faintly of coffee and ambition. They asked about procedures, safeguards, authorization. They asked how close she'd come to losing the aircraft, the data herself. She answered what mattered. "I stayed within human judgment," she said calmly. Some of them frowned at that. One civilian advisor leaned forward. "With respect, Admiral, that's not a measurable metric." She met his gaze without hostility. "That's the point." There were murmurs, discomfort. the familiar reflex to translate everything into charts and outcomes. Stone watched from the far end of the table, saying nothing. He knew when silence did more work than argument. Another voice spoke, younger, conflicted. "Ma'am, do you believe this kind of technology can ever be used ethically?" She paused before answering. "Not for effect. For honesty. Yes," she said, "but not without accountability, and not without someone willing to say no when it works too well." The room went quiet. She felt it then, the subtle shift she'd learned to recognize over decades. Not agreement, something better. Consideration. The meeting ended without resolution. It always did, but something had been placed on the table that wouldn't be easily removed. That afternoon, she walked the perimeter alone. No entourage, no aides, just her, the fence line, and the open air. She moved slower now, letting her body dictate the pace instead of forcing it to keep up with expectations long past. Near the training grounds, she heard laughter. She stopped. 5 men ran drills in the dust, movements sharp but restrained, not showing off, listening to correction, sweat-streaked faces that had learned humility the hard way. Jake was among them. He caught sight of her and froze. She raised a hand slightly, signaling him to continue. He hesitated, then nodded and returned to the drill. No resentment, no defiance, just focus. She watched for a while. Not as an admiral. As a woman who had once been exactly where they were, believing strength meant never being questioned, never slowing down, never admitting you didn't know everything yet. She turned away before they noticed her again. That evening, she returned to Murphy's bar. Not in uniform. Just a simple jacket, plain boots, nothing to announce who she was or what she'd done. Sam raised an eyebrow when he saw her. "Same?" he asked. She nodded. The bourbon arrived. She took a small sip, savoring it this time. The bar felt different, or maybe she did. A young woman sat 2 stools away, alone, shoulders tense in the way people got when they didn't yet know if they belonged somewhere. The woman kept glancing around, half expecting someone to challenge her presence. Sarah recognized the posture immediately. She leaned slightly toward her. "You don't have to apologize for taking up space," she said quietly. The woman blinked, startled, then laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to people who have been there." They shared a moment of easy silence. Outside, the night deepened. Later, alone again, Sarah returned to her quarters and sat at the small desk she rarely used. She opened a blank document. No classification header, no formal language. Just words. She wrote about the pause, about the moment the algorithm stopped, about the difference between making a decision and carrying it afterward. She didn't know who would read it. Maybe no one. Maybe someone years from now looking for permission to trust their conscience. When she finished, she closed the file without nomming it. Some things didn't need titles. Before turning in, she picked up her uniform one last time and hung it carefully in the closet. Not with ceremony, with gratitude. She knew she would wear it again if needed. But she also knew this chapter had ended. As she lay in the dark, the bass settling into its rhythms once more, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Peace, not because the world was safe, but because she had finally stopped running from who she was when no one was watching. She thought of the bar, of the cockpit, of the men learning, of the machine that had learned to stop. And she understood something she'd been circling her entire life. Strength was never about proving you belonged. It was about knowing when you did, and refusing to let anyone else decide it for you. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.